Now, I want to talk to you about something that genuinely fascinates me, and it is not the romance of it. It is not the poster with the red, dusty sunset and the brave astronaut standing there looking heroic. I want to talk to you about the physics. Because the physics of getting a human being to Mars and keeping that human being alive is one of the most brutally honest conversations that modern science can have with modern culture, and most people are simply not having it. There is a deeply embedded idea floating around in the popular imagination right now. It goes something like this: we went to the moon. Mars is just further away. So we need a bigger rocket, more food, more water, and a longer trip. Simple extension of the same basic problem. A longer car ride to a slightly less convenient destination. And I want you to hold that idea in your mind very carefully, because I am about to show you, piece by piece, using nothing but the fundamental laws of physics and chemistry and biology, why that idea is not just wrong. It is catastrophically, dangerously, almost comically wrong. Let me give you a picture first. Imagine you have decided to go live at the absolute freezing bottom of the deepest ocean trench on this planet. You are going to do it inside a fragile metal can. A beautifully engineered fragile metal can, but fragile nonetheless. And to get there, you have to ride on top of a controlled chemical explosion for 7 months. 7 months of riding a bomb. And the whole time you are riding that bomb, if a single rubber seal degrades, you die. If a single valve misfires, you die. If the carbon dioxide scrubbers that pull your own poisonous breath out of the recycled air run low, you choke slowly to death in a room the size of a large closet. And the entire time, invisible high-energy particles, which are essentially microscopic bullets moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light, are passing directly through the walls of your tin can and directly through your body. That is not a metaphor. That is precisely the engineering and physical situation a human being faces on a journey to Mars. Now, let us start with the rocket. Because before you even think about surviving on Mars, you have to get there. And the mathematics of getting there is where the first wall appears. There is an equation. Tsiolkovsky derived it. It is called the rocket equation, and it is one of the most unforgiving mathematical relationships in all of applied physics. The core idea is this. A rocket moves by throwing mass out of its back end very fast. The faster you throw it, and the more of it you throw, the faster your rocket goes. Sounds straightforward enough. But here is where the mathematics turns on you. To accelerate a rocket, you need fuel, but that fuel has mass. And because it has mass, you now need more fuel to accelerate that fuel too, and that additional fuel also has mass. So you need even more fuel to move that. And this process keeps compounding on itself in an exponential relationship. What this means practically is the following. Every time you want to meaningfully increase the useful payload you are sending to Mars, meaning every time you want to add another month of food, or another centimeter of radiation shielding, or more water, or more medical equipment, you do not just add a little more fuel, you add an enormous, disproportionate, crushing amount of additional fuel. The relationship is not linear, it is exponential. And exponential growth in engineering requirements is the enemy of everything. Let me put numbers around this intuition. The moon is roughly 384,000 kilometers away. Mars, at its closest approach, is about 54 million kilometers away. At its furthest, it is closer to 400 million kilometers away. And we do not get to pick when we launch based on convenience. The orbital mechanics dictate a launch window that only opens roughly every 26 months. Miss it, and you wait another 2 years. But the distance is almost beside the point because distance alone does not capture the energy budget. What matters in orbital mechanics is the change in velocity, what engineers call delta V. Getting to Mars requires a delta V budget that dwarfs the moon by an enormous factor. And every meter per second of delta V you need costs you fuel mass in that exponential, merciless way the rocket equation demands. This is why the rockets going to Mars are not just slightly bigger than the ones that went to the moon. They are in a fundamentally different engineering class. And every kilogram of life support equipment, every kilogram of food, every kilogram of water, every kilogram of radiation shielding you want to bring along makes the problem worse in a compounding way, not a linear way. The rocket equation does not negotiate. It does not offer compromise. It is a mathematical wall. And human biological survival requirements keep demanding you bring more mass, and the rocket equation keeps demanding you pay for that mass exponentially in fuel. Now, let us talk about what is happening to the human body during those 7 months of travel. And I want to be precise here because this is where the biology becomes genuinely alarming. Earth is sitting inside a magnetic cocoon. Our planet has a strong, large magnetic field generated by the churning of molten iron in its core. This field extends far out into space around us, and it does something absolutely critical. It deflects a continuous stream of charged particles that comes from the sun, and it deflects an even more dangerous stream of extremely high-energy particles that comes from outside our solar system entirely. These are called galactic cosmic rays. They are atomic nuclei, mostly protons and helium nuclei, but sometimes heavier atoms, stripped of their electrons and accelerated to enormous energies by supernova explosions and other violent astrophysical events far away. They travel at a significant fraction of the speed of light. And when they hit matter, including human tissue, they do not just bounce off. They plow through it, leaving a trail of ionization and molecular destruction. On Earth's surface, you are protected by the magnetic field and also by the full thickness of Earth's atmosphere above you, which is itself equivalent to several meters of water as a radiation shield. Astronauts on the International Space Station, which is still inside Earth's magnetic field, already receive roughly 10 times the annual radiation dose of a person on the ground. On a journey to Mars, you are outside that magnetic field entirely. You are in open interplanetary space. The radiation dose rate goes up dramatically, and it is not just a steady background drizzle of particles. The sun periodically produces solar particle events, eruptions of enormous energy, and a single large solar particle event in deep space without adequate shielding, can deliver a potentially lethal radiation dose in a matter of hours. What does this radiation do to a human body physically? It does not heat you. You do not feel it. It is not like standing in front of a fire. Instead, these particles pass through your cells and they physically break chemical bonds. They break the DNA strands inside the nuclei of your cells. Your body has repair mechanisms for this, and they are very good, but they are not infinitely good. Accumulate enough damage faster than the repair mechanisms can keep up, and you start developing radiation sickness. Accumulate more over a longer period, and you dramatically increase your probability of developing cancer, particularly in tissues that are rapidly dividing. You also accumulate damage to the central nervous system. There is emerging evidence that chronic high-energy particle exposure degrades cognitive function, affects memory and decision-making over time. And on a Mars mission, the people making the decisions are the same people being irradiated. You could shield the spacecraft, more mass, rocket equation compounds. You could use water walls, polyethylene, hydrogen-rich materials. But to get the shielding down to something approaching manageable radiation levels for a 7-month journey, you are talking about a massive shielding material that the rocket equation makes nearly prohibitive to launch from Earth's gravity well. It is a circle that keeps closing on itself. Now, let us say you arrive. Let us say the crew is healthy enough, the ship is intact, everything has worked. You are now in Mars orbit, and you are going to land. And I want to walk you through what the surface of Mars is like, because it is not a cold desert waiting to be terraformed. It is a hostile chemical and physical environment that is fundamentally opposed to human biological function. The Martian atmosphere is about 95% carbon dioxide. It has a surface pressure of roughly 600 pascals. Earth's surface pressure is about 101,000 pascals. That means the Martian atmosphere is less than 1% as dense as Earth's at sea level. This has two devastating consequences. First, it means there is essentially no air pressure pushing back against the pressure of fluids inside your body. If you were somehow exposed to that environment without a pressure suit, the water in the mucous membranes of your lungs and eyes would not stay liquid. It would immediately transition to a gas and boil. Not because it is hot, because the external pressure is so low that the boiling point of water drops below body temperature. You would not freeze first. You would experience ebulism. The water in your soft tissues would boil. This is not survivable. Second, the thin atmosphere means no meaningful protection from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The Martian surface receives significantly more damaging ultraviolet than Earth's surface because there is no ozone layer of any consequence, and the thin atmosphere scatters almost nothing. So the surface radiation environment is a combination of galactic cosmic rays, solar particle radiation, and intense ultraviolet, all simultaneously. But we are not done with the Martian surface. Because the dirt itself is a chemical hazard. Mars has no liquid water on its surface and has not had any for billions of years. In that long, dry, oxidizing environment, the Martian regolith, the soil, has accumulated very high concentrations of perchlorates. Perchlorates are chemical compounds containing the perchlorate ion, which is a chlorine atom bonded to 4 oxygen atoms. On Earth, perchlorate is a known industrial pollutant and is classified as a toxic substance. Specifically, it is a potent inhibitor of iodine uptake in the thyroid gland. The thyroid controls metabolic rate, hormone production, and a vast range of physiological functions. Chronic perchlorate exposure disrupts thyroid function significantly, and in the Martian soil, perchlorate concentrations are measured at roughly 0.5 to 1% by mass. That is not a trace contaminant. That is a major soil constituent. This matters for any human activity on the surface because Martian dust is everywhere. It is extraordinarily fine. Dust storms on Mars can cover the entire planet and last for months. That fine perchlorate-laced dust will find its way into everything, into seals, into airlocks, into life support systems. Maintaining a clean separation between the outside toxic environment and the inside survivable environment is an engineering problem of relentless, ongoing difficulty with no permanent solution. Now, think about what you need to survive long term. You need water. Mars has water ice at its poles and possibly in the subsurface, but extracting it, purifying it, and doing so in a way that is energy positive and self-sustaining on a planetary surface with no existing infrastructure, a thin atmosphere, perchlorate-rich soil, and limited solar energy because Mars is further from the sun, and those dust storms block sunlight for months, this is not a challenge that optimism solves. It is a challenge that energy, materials, science, chemical engineering, and an enormous investment of mass and equipment brought from Earth must solve. And that mass, all of it, every gram of every machine needed to do all of this, had to be launched through Earth's gravity well on rockets governed by the tyranny of the exponential rocket equation. I want to be clear about something. None of what I have described is an argument against the intellectual pursuit of Mars exploration. Robotic exploration of Mars is one of the genuinely productive scientific projects of our era. Those machines are telling us real things about planetary formation, about the history of water in the solar system, about the conditions under which chemistry that might be relevant to biology can occur. That is worthwhile science. But there is a narrative circulating right now, a popular cultural story, that Mars is a backup plan for humanity, that it is a second home waiting for us. That colonizing Mars is a straightforward engineering project that bold enough people with enough money and determination can simply push through into existence. And what the physics tells you is that this narrative is not engaging with the actual problem. Mars is a freezing, irradiated, chemically toxic, pressure-dead rock at the bottom of a deep gravity well, sitting 7 months away from Earth on a rocket governed by exponential fuel requirements, with no magnetic shield, no breathable atmosphere, no liquid water, and soil that will chemically attack your endocrine system if you breathe the dust. Every single one of these problems is real. Every single one of them requires a solution that adds mass, and adding mass makes the rocket equation worse. The distance between going to the moon and going to Mars is not a matter of a bigger rocket and more patience. It is a matter of every fundamental physical and biological constraint stacking on top of each other in a way that transforms the problem qualitatively, not just quantitatively. It is a different category of problem. The physics does not have feelings about this. It does not care about the inspiring photographs or the billionaires with launch schedules or the children who dream of red sunsets. The physics simply is. And if you want to solve it, you start by looking at it honestly, in full, without flinching. That is the only way any real engineering ever gets done. The universe is not obligated to cooperate with our plans for it, but it is willing to be understood, and understanding precisely and honestly is always the first step.